Well, thank you for joining me for the launch of Competitive Tension research paper, which contains some important messages for governments and business as we start to emerge into what we imagine will be the new post-COVID or possibly living with COVID normal. I'm Nick Cato, I'm Executive Director of the Menzies Research Centre, and I'm delighted to be joined on this call today also by Kate Steadman from the Serco Institute, who joins us from London, our collaborators on this project. Thank you, Kate. We'll be coming to you later. Also with us is one of Australia's most foremost business leaders, Tony Shepherd, and I'll be inviting Tony to comment on the report in a moment. And we're also privileged to be joined by Gary Sturgess, a champion and thought leader, as many of you would know, in the area of government reform, public service delivery reform, and the area of contestability, which is at the heart of this report. I'll be acknowledging the others to whom we owe a debt of gratitude later on this call. But first, let's get to the substance. Competitive tension, the value of contestable public services in a post-pandemic world. The response to COVID-19 has sharpened our appreciation of the role of government services and the importance of delivering services efficiently and effectively. The emergency has stress tested the public sector in the most rigorous manner. Not since World War II have we called upon so much from our governments in such a short space of time and against such pressures. They've been asked to perform hitherto unimaginable feats, I guess, in record time, often with limited information and limited experience. For those of us working in public policy, I think it's illuminated a very, very important lesson. While we should never lose sight of the imperative of preventing public spending going beyond our means, beyond the country's means, government performance cannot purely be measured in dollars and cents. When the provision of government services becomes literally a matter of life and death, what matters most is that those services are delivered effectively, efficiently, in essence, that they work. Hence the timeliness of this report, Competitive Tension, the value of contestable services in a post-pandemic world. It shows how introducing competitive tension into public sector service delivery can, across the entire range of public services, from health and transport to correctional services and national security, you can increase the effectiveness, the productivity, and effectively the performance of government quite dramatically. With more about the report soon, including more on correctional services from Gary Sturgess, who's joining us from a correctional service institution, which he'll explain towards the end of this call. But first to Tony Shepherd. Tony Shepherd is one of Australia's foremost business leaders who's worked at the nexus between the public and private sectors for many years on major infrastructure projects, and as the former president of the Business Council of Australia. He chaired the National Commission of Audit, a comprehensive review of government services, which was commissioned by the incoming Abbott government in 2014. And he later led the Menzies Research Centre's review, Shepherd Review as we came to know it, which assessed some of the key elements of the Commission of Audit in 2018. Tony, can I invite you to give some comments on the report?
Well, thank you, Nick. When Nick approached me with the draft of this report, I was absolutely taken by it, quite struck by it. And I thought, this is a subject which we have been quietly proceeding with, but not recognising over the last 10 years. I know New South Wales government has been working away on contestability and outsourcing and what have you. But it really struck a chord with me because my old company, Transfield, was one of the pioneers in Australia of outsourcing and PPPs. And in fact, this painting behind me is the Sydney Harbour Tunnel, which was my first PPP, major PPP project, which is still operating successfully. And I think the concession comes to an end in 2023, which just shows you how old I am when you outlive the concession that you've arranged. But anyway, I think it's timely that we, in this post-pandemic era, when we go from a pandemic to an endemic, and our economy is struggling to recover, government budgets are shot to ribbons, deficits have grown to unbelievable levels, that we look at the efficiency and the capacity of government to deliver the quality of services that the public expect at the lowest possible cost, or the most reasonable cost anyway. And so it is absolutely timely. Australia's productivity performance over the last 10 years has been appalling, absolutely appalling. And in fact, that's why our wages are so static. And so again, if we can get the public sector operating more efficiently and lifting productivity, the public sector in Australia makes up about 20% of the economy. It has a knock-on effect to the rest of the economy as well. So this report is important on many bases. The Australian public now is getting more comfortable, I think, with outsourcing. Probably still a bit wary of privatisation, but I think at times now they don't even notice who's providing the service, and that's good. But you know, we have an example here, I think, of the Sydney ferries, where people wouldn't know anymore that it is operated by the private sector, and all they know is that, you know, when it was outsourced, the quality of the service improved dramatically. We're happy to have Serco join us today, Kate. I visited their head office in beautiful Richmond on the Thames many, many years ago, and was briefed on what they were doing. And quite clearly, I just stole all their IP and brought it back to Australia. But anyway, they are in Australia now, but they're an outstanding company and have pioneered in this area. Everything from nuclear power stations down to the most mundane tasks they have done. So it's great to have you here, Kate, and good to see you up so early in the morning to do it anyway. So Nick, thank you very much for this opportunity. I really look forward to the discussion this morning, but as I say, this is a very timely reminder of what is vital in terms of the provision of government services, and that is contestability. And we do need to revitalise this as a program throughout all state and federal and local governments in Australia. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. And I'd echo your thoughts on Serco. We've been dealing with the Serco Institute, which is the public policy institute set up by Serco. And we've been enormously impressed with the sort of creativity and innovative thinking which is going on at Serco and also elsewhere on how we can work, business and government can intersect more productively. So without further ado, and since it's late at night and I don't want to keep you up much longer, Kate, let me introduce Kate Steadman. She's the Group Strategy and Communications Director at the Serco Institute. Kate.
Thank you very much, Nick. And wow, what an honour it is to be here with everyone today, and some of the real greats of this principle and the arguments around government and the private sector and outsourcing. So good morning, everyone. And here in London, we've just made it back in time for this event after a lively night out clubbing. So I'm sorry if I don't look as fresh as some of my my Australian colleagues on the panel, but no, seriously, it's my real pleasure to be speaking here on behalf of the Serco Institute today. The Institute is based in London, but we're an international think tank, and we're on a mission to help governments develop the next generation of public service solutions for citizens. And we pride ourselves on research excellence and, of course, just as importantly, innovation in service design, both of which, in our view, are central to reimagining public services for citizens across the globe. And, you know, in that light, it's been a real privilege to partner with the Menzies Research Centre in this excellent report, I think, on the value of contestability, as we look towards the post-pandemic world and the massive challenges that governments across the world are facing. The MRC, I think, when you read up about it, it says that it tasks itself to work out what government should be doing and then make sure it's doing it efficiently. Well, this is a task that we at the Serco Institute really support, and particularly the focus on providing better services more efficiently. It's a task critical to Australia And by the way, if I can say, if it's not disloyal to my favorite country in the world, you are our cousins, are very much our cousins of the English, but let's face it, much better looking, better tanned, and better at barbecues. So a critical task for Australia, but on a serious point, it's a critical task for so many other nations of the world. And particularly, as they say at this time, when the demands on public services are greater than ever before, and yet public finances are obviously more challenged than ever before as well. So finally, I'm delighted to be with you here this morning alongside some fantastic speakers, most of all, actually, because as someone who's worked across both the public sector and the private sector, we are discussing a principle I believe in absolutely fervently. And the heart of this report is the bold but simple assertion that contestable processes should be the default strategy for public service delivery. And essentially, that introducing competition into public service delivery will ensure that all governments can serve their citizens more effectively. And it's so important to understand why that matters. And ultimately, it's because the most important thing in public service is, lest we forget, is that the citizen is well served. So I guess I just want to say a few words really about how, in my mind, contestability contributes to this agenda. And I guess when you try and distill it all down, and many of these arguments are very well rehearsed, but actually people don't speak about them often enough. And we mustn't forget that we must continue to educate new generations about the benefits of contestability. So I guess I've got three key points to make. The first one is choice. The second one being the cost benefits of that choice. And the third one being the quality benefits of that choice. So firstly, when it comes to choice, when we at the Institute argue for contestability, for us, it's not about public versus private or one sector versus another, but it's about the benefits of competition versus monopoly. And opening up the delivery of public services to others promotes choice and diversity. And regardless of who ends up delivering, our view is that choice ensures governments can reward superior performance and punish lower quality delivery. Additionally, the increased pool of service providers encourages innovation and that real unique approach to delivery and security of supply. And we can see it across the world, whether it's in waste collection in Arizona or prison operators in Australia or education policy in the UK. We see a range of case studies outlined in the report showing how a variety of service has reduced cost, driven quality, and improved delivery. And I think, the really positive thing when we look back through history is that this is not an ideological debate, or it's not restricted to one political ideology or another. And we see governments of all colours seeing the benefits of contestability. And the freedom of choice is so important also because it gives citizens and governments a means to drive up expectations among organisations, to let the best delivery come to the top, and to give governments a chance to hone in on what it sees as the most valuable elements of a service. So secondly, coming on from choice, that the key, the first key element in my mind is the lower costs to the taxpayer and increased efficiency that contestability brings. And I think, as this report shows, strengthening the principle of contestability across all public services has the potential to increase public sector productivity by around 10 to 20% in newly contested service areas. And as I say, I reiterate, because I think it's really important, that's regardless of who ends up delivering them. We're not urging privatization, we're just saying, let the best come to the top and drive up standards across the board. Now, of course, the caveat is that competition has to be governed intelligently. Governments need to ensure they look at best value, not just false economies, and look at the best outcomes, not just the lowest price. But on the whole, it seems to work. And finally, quality. Competing or outsourcing public services also results in greater accountability, in my view, and better outcomes. It generates new ideas, new approaches, inspires originality, and it allows innovation to thrive. But in addition, competition is not the antonym of collaboration. Quite the opposite. Contestability can encourage providers to work together, share information, pool ideas, and find solutions. And if providers can operate together more smoothly, then services are only going to be delivered more effectively for citizens. And again, it's not just about the private sector, but for me, it means opening up the market to a range of suppliers of all sizes, social enterprises, mutuals, charities. Everyone should have their chance to make an impact on the public services of today. And I think one of the interesting things, we're seeing in the UK at the moment is as well as encouraging that diversity of suppliers from across the supply chain, we're also seeing the private sector or outsourcing or contestability or the charitable sector used as a real tool in adding social value to public services. It's no longer a nice to have, it's no longer an option. The UK central government is now mandating that 10% of contract awards are based on added social value. And I think there are complications to the implementation of that, but it's a really powerful message and one I think we're all really keen to rise to the challenge to. And I'm not going to waffle on for much longer, but I'll just say one final point under my quality piece, which is accountability. And I think often, we forget that when services are contracted out, and regardless of who that's to, often the provider is held accountable by tens and tens of KPIs, ideally based on the outcomes of a service, not always, unfortunately, but ideally based on the outcomes. And that accountability that we see when things are contested actually often outweighs that which we get when things that are delivered in-house. So, ladies and gentlemen, everyone, I could waffle on for ages about how I see the benefits of contestability, but ultimately the government must not unnecessarily cripple itself by being self-reliant, but must instill a culture of seeing what others bring to the table. Contestability is not an outcome, it's not a conclusion, it's a process, a way to assess, compare, and consider alternatives to achieve policy goals. It's a way to lead the growth and quality improvement of public services. It doesn't result in the preference of provider because the priority is, first and foremost, on the standard of services the citizen experiences. And I think if COVID has demonstrated anything, it's how important a contestable and diverse marketplace is to community and economic well-being. The resilience rather than the reliance it can create, the spirit of innovation rather than stagnation it inspires, and the flexibility rather than the rigidity it encourages. So I think really, I thank the MRC so much and Peter Seat and others who are here this evening for a fantastic piece of work, and to my team as well at the Institute, particularly Ben O'Keefe. And I urge people to read the report. I hope you find it interesting, and I hope it can be a really powerful tool in improving the public services of the future in this difficult time that nations all face. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. We live, of course, in the age of collaboration. I kept reading that before this pandemic, and now I get to understand what it is. We've been able to collaborate with Serco on this report, and we hope that collaboration will continue with the Serco Institute and indeed other think tanks and institutes around the world. And I may also thank, while we're on the subject of Serco, Peter Welling, the CEO of Serco Asia Pacific, who's on this call too. Also, I think the theme of this report is collaboration. We're updating the thinking which led to some major reforms in Britain and in Australia and elsewhere. But I think this is updated for the era of collaboration. We're looking at a much more collaborative relationship between government and business, not merely a case of government outsourcing lock, stock and barrel services or other things it does, but really working collaboration. And so I'm very delighted that the Australian Chamber of Industry are supporting us with this launch today and have shown great interest in this, because so many of the reforms that we need will come from the private sector. We have here in Sydney, many of you will know it, a wonderful new quick way to get out of the city to the north, which was a private sector initiative. They came to government, not the other way around. And I'll welcome Andrew McKellar, the CEO of the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, who'll be joining us shortly. Just before you do, I just might do a little bit of housekeeping, if I may, Andrew. You, like me, will be looking forward to the day when QR codes are relegated into the dustbin of history. But while they're here, we're going to use them. So this QR code here, if you click on this, it'll take you through to the page on the Menzies Research Centre website where we can download the report. Other people I want to thank and acknowledge, first of all, the principal advisors on this report who worked long hours, a work of dedication by our principal advisors. That's Peter Seaton, a director of the MRC, and Matt Crocker, who between them brought a wealth of experience from the reforms of the New South Wales government that began with the election of Barry O'Farrell 10 years ago. It's been invaluable, and I thank you for your enormous amount of work you put into this. I also acknowledge Paul Espy, the Menzies Research Centre's chair, director Mitch Hook, directors Mitch Hook, and Andrew Robb, Nick Minchin, former cabinet ministers, of course, and Tamsin Lawrence from ACCI, Meredith Jackson. Adrian Temple, a director of the MRC, joins us. He's also the chairman of the South Australian Productivity Commission. And Christy McSweeney, a director of the MRC, has just been pre-selected as the next Liberal candidate for the seat of Swan in WA. I also welcome Peter Kane, MLA, Andrew Crombie. I should have mentioned, of course, Andrew is a director of the MRC. April Parmalee, the Australian Chamber of Commerce, CEO of the American Australian Chamber of Commerce in Australia. Welcome, April, and Hugh Morgan. Many of you will know Hugh's sterling reputation, both in industry and public policy. And so I'll invite Andrew to join us and say a few words. And Andrew McKellar, CEO of the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Andrew.
Well, look, thank you very much, Nick, and indeed delighted to be able to join you this morning for the launch of this report. Indeed, I think it is an excellent, a well-researched contribution to the public debate, and I think one which is extremely timely. It aligns with the issues that that the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry and its state chamber members have been pushing for many years, and in particular very topical in states like New South Wales. I note that the report draws quite heavily, in fact, on some earlier work that Gary Sturgess did with for the New South Wales Business Chamber. So a report going back to 2012, Diversity and Contestability in the Public Service Economy. And I think there's a lot of common ground between that earlier work and what we're seeing today. I have to say there's nothing really in this report that ACCI would disagree with. We think that these are important issues. These are issues which do need to be highlighted in the public debate. It's not a new topic, but it's one which definitely needs to be revisited. And I think in many areas, in fact, we've seen a slipping back to some degree from some of the important principles that are in this report. Increasingly, we've seen, particularly I think at the state government level, many governments moving back from earlier sort of adoption of purchaser provider models, an overlap again between policy functions, regulatory functions, service functions. And I think it's timely to remember how important the gains can be from separating those functions and then opening up particularly service delivery to greater competitive tension and pressure, remembering that at the end of the day, the objective here is about getting better value for money and getting better service delivery into the hands of the public. And I think that's really what it's all about. So I think what's good here is that the report is steering away from just a normal sort of binary solution of trade-off between services and costs, taxes and debt to fund those services. Instead, it's looking at ways to produce better services, to increase public and private productivity. As Tony has already mentioned, the productivity performance has been well below what it needs to be. We have to find ways to restart that and that's going to drive higher living standards in the years ahead. This is an important contribution in that regard. So look, I think I keep my comments brief. We want to hear more directly in the next part of this presentation, but can I say, on behalf of the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, we very much welcome this contribution. I do commend the report to everybody online today, and certainly to get it out there to a broader audience. Let's have the debate, the discussion in the public domain about these important reforms. So often these days, it's a struggle to get governments to grapple with those very important issues, to get a real debate going on, what the next wave of economic reform is going to look like. And I think this is a great contribution. So Nick, perhaps back to you, but with our full support. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. And thank you for those words. Just to echo what you said, competition, we think, is the key to good public policy. Whatever we've looked at, or whether over the years, be it education, be it energy, the energy sector, in every area we've looked at, I think without exception, competition benefits the consumer. There may be a policy area where that's not true, but we haven't got to it yet. Competition benefits the consumer, and so the key to the thinking here is by introducing competition, or at least the feeling, the threat of competition into government service delivery, you will lift services for the consumer. And one of the ways you do that is start thinking of taxpayers and citizens as customers, and delivering good customer service. And now, finally, our final guest on this call is Professor Gary Sturgess, AM. Gary, as many of you will know, led the reforms, or was really a key person in the reforms that happened in the New South Wales government here in 10 years ago, but also has had a lot of influence in many other places. He's, if I may say so, passionate about the issue of contestability. And in compiling this report, we came back time and time again to Gary's work for our point of anchor. Gary joins us today from a correctional services institution in New South Wales. I think not as an inmate, but Gary, perhaps you'd like to, your floor is yours, Gary. First time we've had somebody on this call, as far as I know, from a correctional services institution. Perhaps you want to explain that first and move on.
Thanks very much, Nick. I am indeed. I'm calling from John Moroney Correctional Centre in Sydney, which is mentioned in the report. And I'm here interviewing senior management, for a report I'm doing on John Moroney and what happened and why it's been a success. So I'll talk a little bit about that, because I think it's a useful case study of the points that have just been made. So John Moroney has been a public facility for several decades. It was in 2016, it was market tested, and the government took a decision to allow an in-house bid. They went ahead and competed against 3 private sector providers, and the in-house team won the bid. So it commenced operation in November 4 years ago. So we're just coming up to the 4-year mark. It has been doing a terrific job. They have within budget, and they're not perfect. Nobody is, but they are meeting almost all of their KPIs, and the ones that are a struggle, the obvious ones, assaults and drug use, are trending in the right direction. So it's a fabulous success story. And so I'm doing some work on understanding why that has been so. There are, I think, and I'm really just sort of summarising here, and for that I've got to apologise, but there are, I think, a couple of key lessons that are appropriate in the current context. The first one is the lessons or the benefits that came out of a market test. The first thing is that having a market test enables a fresh start. This, in effect, is a startup. It's a very old, it's been around for several decades, and it indeed had a very tired both correctional culture and staff culture, and that was completely refreshed. In the course of the final negotiations, management wanted a letter of comfort from the union that they would go along with the reforms. That was difficult. There was a new union leadership, but there was an online vote by rank and file and commissioned officers, and they said, we've won this, we want to prove we can do it. We want to prove that we can match the private sector. And so the union went along with that, gave the letter of comfort, and they have abided by that. And so it's a great success story from that point of view. But there was a complete culture refresh, a much more of a focus on rehabilitation and reintegration. The second thing that comes out of competition, out of winning a competition, is that you get to wear the victor's laurel. The process of winning a competition bestows on management a mandate to implement what they said they would do. And that's an enormously important gift to management and really difficult to replicate outside of a market test, outside of a competitive tender. The other thing that happens, of course, then is that you sign a contract. It's in the case of government, can't legally contract with itself, but there is a very binding operating agreement which drives the ongoing management of the centre and the way that it is remunerated and the way that management performs. And indeed, I'm sitting in the office of one of the functional managers at the prison, and I noticed on the desk is a well-thumbed copy of the operating agreement. This is a document that they refer to frequently because they are held to it. It's important for several reasons. One is that it creates commitment. It creates commitment on the part of the management team to a budget and to a set of KPIs, and that's enormously important. And the KPIs were well designed, and so they're facing the organisation in the right direction. But in terms of government, this is also enormously important. It creates a commitment on Treasury's part. They know what their budget is going to be going forward. It's 7 year plus 5, 7 years, and then a chance on either side to walk away after 7 with a potential for another 5. And that's enormously important. The public sector normally only has 12 months visibility on what their budget will be. And they also know how success will be judged well in advance. That's an enormously important gift that contractors, when they run public services, probably take for granted because it's inherent in their model, but it becomes very striking when it's an in-house team that has won. And finally, there are consequences. The in-house team bid a profit margin because they have to cover things like working capital. They've got to have money to cover abatements. They, as it turns out, the abatements are for the manager. It's not shared with the team more broadly, but those abatements are a very powerful signal to the general manager, the governor, as to how they're performing. It sort of underscores the KPIs. Downstairs in the prison, as you come in through the entrance, the KPIs are up on a board. All of the staff get to see how they're performing. So an enormously important model. The underlying point for the present purpose is the gift of contestability. The fact that they won this in a competitive tender against other providers, and that they know that if they don't continue to perform, and this drives them, I can promise you, very hard, they know if they don't continue to perform, then there is a possibility of this being taken from them and either rebid or given to in the early years certainly, given to the underbidder, the one who came second. That's an enormously powerful incentive and a positive one. This is not a negative experience, but rather the KPIs and the budget underline their vision, underline what's driving them, which is to radically change the culture of this institution so that it is focused on a healthy and respectful environment for the inmates and this is a remand institution focusing from day one on their release and trying to make sure that they don't return. So, for me, a great case study in what can be done with contestability when it is done well and when it's focused not just on saving money, but on actually driving better results for the public. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you, Gary. We've got about 8 minutes left, I think, on this call. We've got a couple of questions. Any more questions, please send them in. First question, I might just return to you, Gary, to start this off and then go to Tony Shepherd. The questioner says, it seems that one of the most important things is setting reliable benchmarks and clear KPIs. How creative do you have to be in setting these, and how do we avoid making the only KPI money?
Yeah, look, the last one is actually, I think, one of the places where I do share some of the caution of the left about contracting, because competition is such a powerful tool for driving out cost that it gets really tempting for governments to use it almost exclusively for that purpose. And of course, if you don't nail down your qualitative standards very tight, and at John Moroney, the government took the opportunity to not just do that, but to ask for higher standards, to ask for things that had never been asked for before in a remand prison in this state, then you do wind up, it does become a race to the bottom. And I have published on this in the UK a report that didn't make me too popular with the UK Cabinet Office, saying that this is a grossly irresponsible thing to do. Look, in some places, and prisons is a good case study, because we actually know a lot about what kind of KPIs we need to set in order to focus on producing the right outcomes. And the outcomes are pretty much agreed on across the board: safe, secure, humane, and now increasingly focusing on reducing reoffending. In other areas, other public services, we aren't as agreed on the outcomes, and we're not as clear about the connections between inputs and outputs, and therefore it's a bit more of, we need to be a little bit more cautious in the design of the KPIs. But this is one of the questions, Nick, I've been asking each of the people I've been interviewing on this, and saying, have we got the KPIs basically right? Are they focusing you on the things that matter in running a healthy prison? And are we avoiding creating perverse incentives, avoiding distortions? And the answer has been yes. There's some minor grumbles, but yes, they are focused on that. And that's not praise to the team that I worked with in doing all this work, but rather it's the learned experience over time of the UK and Australia, and borrowing lessons from each other.
Tony Shepherd.
Yes, Nick.
Would you like to add to that, as somebody who's been at the other end, if you like, of the contestability process from a business point of view?
Well, Nick, in the early days, Treasury dominated the outsourcing and the competitive market approach. And of course, they were driven purely by money, as they usually are. But I think as it's matured, it's become clearer and clearer that, in fact, the KPIs in terms of performance and the quality of service have become far more important, in fact, than money. I mean, they're still looking for savings. And I think it has definitely improved the quality of service wherever it's been applied. My experience is, whether it even be mundane things like maintaining a toll road, I think the quality has improved significantly. But in things like public transport, the quality of the service, the surveys that are conducted regularly to see what customers think of the quality of the service, that sort of thing. And then you've stressed this morning, and I think Gary and Kate have too, the transparency of it is also great, because a lot of these results now, and we encourage the government to do it, and Services New South Wales now publishes extensively the results of its surveys, just shine a light on just how satisfied or dissatisfied the customer is. So I think this contestability one of the things that is really great achievements and is equally as important as saving money has in fact been shining a light on customer satisfaction and the performance of your task as a contractor to the government.
I know we've got a number of people on this call for the defence and national security sector. So this question from Zach Smith, I think, is very pertinent. How do we balance the need for competitive tension with the need for security in areas such as defence acquisitions and critical infrastructure? Can the risk of competitive fragmentation bring about risk in the winner-takes-all contest of national security? Kate, do you have any thoughts on that?
Sorry, I was just coming off mute. Thank you for passing me possibly the hardest question. But no, no, it's absolutely fantastic question. I think there's two things I'd say. That I do think there are some things that involve judgment about human life, for example, that should be the preserve of the state. I believe that, and I know that's not exactly where the question's headed, but I think it's related, and I think it's important. So I think when it comes to the deprivation of liberty and decisions made about that, for example, I think that should be the preserve of the state. I do think that this thing about national security and security in general is really difficult and critical. And I think it goes back to my earlier point about ensuring a diversity of provision, because as soon as you develop a monopoly, and it applies either way, whether the monopoly is on the public sector side or it's on the private sector side, but you create a dependency and a reliance, which I agree is completely unhealthy. I don't know if the question's also getting potentially at issues of kind of foreign investment, which I think is, a huge other area of complication when you've got another national state trying to interfere potentially in the defense of a different realm. So I do think there's areas of complication. It's not particularly my area of expertise on that real area of national security, but I think most importantly, I think there are ways of managing it. I think with all these things, there are ways of managing it with the right guardrails and the right principles. But I don't know if other panelists have anything more to add on that. Thanks.
Well, I'll just thank Zach for that question and for the thought-provoking question, which we might come back and explore later. We've just got a few minutes left on the call. I just want to throw one last question, which I think is, again, pretty pertinent to our times. This one from Trevor Rowe. Trevor Rowe says, how important it is to get bipartisan consensus on reform if reform is to stick. I think we all know that. So in this case of this area of contestability, is this an area in which we can get bipartisan support? I ask that rhetorically because I know our report illustrates that it is something that governments of both stripes can pick up and run with. But maybe you've got some comments on that, Andrew?
Oh, look, absolutely. I think Trevor has, belled a pretty important topic here. I think what the concern I have is that whether it be at a national level or in many cases across states and territories in Australia in recent years, we have lost the appetite for reform. I think if we look back to the glory days when reform, a much more active reform agenda was being pursued, and whether that was under Labor governments, the Hawke and Keating era, during the time of John Howard, where that process was continued, there were degrees of bipartisan consensus at times, and certainly during the Hawke Keating era, as we recall. But it's always been difficult. There's never been complete consensus around this. So it really does require leadership at the government level. It requires a commitment to go beyond sort of transactional politics and really to set an agenda which is looking out, 1 or 2 decades in front, and having that political courage to spend some of your capital and to deliver outcomes which are going to really drive the future productivity agenda. And I think Trevor's pointed to some, topics there, taxation, GST or indirect taxation reform. At the moment, there's no appetite for that. I'm sure going into the next federal election, there'll be neither side of politics in any way wanting to countenance that. So I think this is really where there's a responsibility on the business community, on a broad range of stakeholders to advocate this sort of agenda. We've just got to continue pushing for it. It might take as long as building the second airport in Sydney, but I think we've got to persist. I hope it doesn't, because I think somewhere along the line we have to see that appetite, that leadership in the political domain, the preparedness to take on some tough decisions and to push through the obstacles if we're going to see it. Now, look, I think this topic is one where there should be more chance of getting some of that consensus versus some of those much tougher issues, whether it be tax or whether it be workplace relations. That those are traditional battlegrounds. But look, I think this is a topic where maybe you have a chance of getting some greater bipartisan consensus. I hope so.
Gary, I might just go to you very briefly for a final word on that topic. You mentioned earlier in the product that you're involved in at John Moroney that the importance of the discussions you've had with unions. In your experience, is this a policy reform that should find favour with both parties?
Yes, I mean, look, it's important how we frame this. I don't think it should ever be about private good, public bad. This ought to be about contestability and monopoly. Here you've got a workforce who are much leaner and work harder, but it's also a safer workforce. And people, when they leave John Moroney, and the business model requires them to leave pretty much the correction officers after 3 years for various reasons that are associated with cost structure, they actually get more rapid promotions elsewhere because they're leaving as much more highly trained. So there's a really good story to be told here in terms of great outcomes for the workers. This doesn't need to be framed either as an anti-union agenda. It is about having robust and mature conversations with our unions. And there are plenty of Labor governments and Labor ministers that have got that. And, while appreciating the value of unions, also understand the importance of management being able to have robust and mature conversations with their workforce.
Well, thank you, Gary. I thank you, everybody who's joined this call. I think you'll agree it's been a really good conversation starter, if nothing else. And the best reports always are conversation starters rather than an attempt to be the conversation finisher. So we want to go on talking about this issue and this subject right through the next election and beyond at state level, crucially, and federal level. If you'd like us to, if you're interested in having a further briefing or discussion for your institution or your organisation, please just let us know here at the Menzies Research Centre, and we'd be delighted to organise that for you. And also, any conversation, any comments you have, please get in touch. You can download the report, as I say, using the QR code. If you can't use that, then you can go to www.menziesrc.org, and I think by now it should be, you'll see the report up there on our homepage, or very shortly anyway, and you can click and download it there. Just remains me to thank everybody involved today, to the team at the MRC that have helped organise this, at ACCI, at the Serco Institute, for your cooperation, to our guests, Tony Shepherd, Kate Steadman, Andrew McKellar and Gary Sturgess. Thank you very much for joining us at the Menzies Research Centre, and we'll be in touch.